Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill and I'm here with Daniel. Hello, Daniel.
Hey, Bill.
And we're also here with Chip. Hello, Chip.
Hey, Bill.
And what we're going to do today is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each episode, we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot and share with you everything that we've learned. And today, we want to give a special shout out and thank you to our patrons because they have made this episode possible. We are not in our normal stomping grounds of Western New York. We are in Southern Florida.
Everglades National Park. This has become an annual thing. We've had the privilege to come down here for the third year in a row now, but we're in a little bit of a different place this time, Bill, aren't we?
We are. So for the past 2 years, I've come down, Daniel's come down, Steve came down last year, and we did episodes focused around...
The first one was the Florida panther.
Right.
And we were recording at Long Pine Key. And then the second one was focused on the American crocodile, and we were hiking the trail at Bear Lake in the southern part of the homestead entrance of Everglades National Park.
So those were both focused really like in the park proper,
yes.
right? Where
yeah.
a lot of the
more
visitors
accessible regions, we should say.
Yes. So this year we decided to do something a little different. We decided to hit the water, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are actually on the Everglades Wilderness Waterway, or at least a campsite off of it. We've gone out with some friends and we are spending 5 days, 4 nights out in the Everglades backcountry on a paddle trip. And we are currently staged right now at a campsite called Watson's Place. And it's a ground site. You're allowed to have a few different groups staying here at once, and we have plenty of room to explore a little bit and record this episode. So it's been a fun trip so far.
That's right.
What have we seen?
Oh my gosh, tons of bird life. Right?
Lots of birds. I'd say maybe the roseate spoonbills that flew over might have been a highlight yesterday evening. We've had really awesome encounters of bottlenose dolphins.
That's right. The first night we were staying on a chickie, which is a raised wooden platform, and we got woken up in the middle of the night by the breath of dolphins blowing in the water underneath or alongside us, and we think they were jumping out of the water even.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly sounded like it.
It was amazing, yeah. So it's just been an incredible trip so far, but the highlight for me is getting to spend time with Daniel and getting to meet the legendary Chip that he has talked about for many years. So why don't we talk a little bit, Daniel, about what you've been doing, because I think that's important for the audience to hear, but then also tell us how and why Chip is here.
Yeah, so I've mentioned on the podcast a few times that I did work in Okefenokee Swamp as a naturalist, and when I was living down there and I had first met my friend Chip here, and I was just kind of under his tutelage. I had the privilege of that, and I was learning about alligators and trying to deepen my knowledge about Okefenokee Swamp, and I'd always thought it would be awesome to do an episode on American alligators with Chip Campbell. And we got to kind of know each other and such, so when Bill and I, and then Rich, a friend of the podcast, and John with Earth Spirit, a friend of the podcast as well, when we all had this paddle trip planned, I was like, wait a minute, there's another opportunity here. We're not too far from Chip's neck of the woods in South Georgia. So we got together and here we are finally doing something that we wanted to do for a few years now. So I'm grateful for that.
And thank you for making it happen.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So properly introduce your friend to us.
So now the man himself. So I'm very excited to introduce, I like to call him my Southern naturalist mentor, Chip Campbell, renowned Okefenokee naturalist and conservationist. He's been somebody who's taught me a lot of what I know about wetland complexes from North Carolina all the way on down to Florida, and he has very much augmented my passion and love for crocodilians. So it's great to be able to be here with him today. I've gotten to know him well over the past few years and spent a lot of time out here. So Chip, I'd love if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background, what you do in Okefenokee and the surrounding areas.
Okay.
It's a tall order.
I'm Chip Campbell. I am now retired, but I'm the former Visitor Services concession contractor with the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. My wife Joy and I owned and ran Okefenokee Adventures, located at the eastern entrance to Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge for 20 years. My wife continues to work for the National Wildlife Refuge, where she issues permits for overnight canoe trail camping. And I occasionally still get out in the swamp with canoe parties, but only on an occasional basis today. I'm enjoying my retirement, and I'm enjoying spending time with younger friends like Daniel, because sharing my fascination with these ecosystems and of course with crocodilians has been a long time passion of mine, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do this on this trip. I've never been to this particular site in the Everglades, and but I've read about it. It's got a real history to it.
Now, Chip, for the listeners, for you guys, Okefenokee is, you say that word and you guys can immediately picture what it is and what it's all about.
Yep.
But, you know, for the listeners, like for me, when you said you were going down there, it was a place I'd always heard about,
Right.
but had really no idea of what it is. I didn't even know where it was technically. I knew it was somewhere in the southeast, but I didn't even know. So can you give the listeners just an idea quick of what Okefenokee is?
Okefenokee is the largest blackwater ecosystem in
What does that mean?
North America. The tannic stained water.
Okay.
It is a peat bog complex that essentially graduates over on the eastern side into a depositional creek swamp complex and forms the headwaters of the Suwannee River, which leaves the Okefenokee and is the primary drainage from the swamp. It is actually the headwater of the river. It is structurally, geomorphologically distinct from bottomland systems, floodplain system. It's a perched watershed. The eastern side of Okefenokee is more of a deep peat bog, carnivorous plants, but also open areas where fires have helped keep the landscape open and airy. The western swamp transitions, and most of the swamp is forested. You know, a swamp is a forested wetland, and while it may have some marshy areas in it, it is primarily forested.
Yeah, I had someone tell me once that, you know, a swamp is a wetland forest, and a marsh is really more of a wetland without trees.
Right.
And I know there's transitional, but it seems like a good rule of thumb.
That's
Herbaceous vegetation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your basic thumbnail definition. Now, the kind of swamp we're in right here, a mangrove swamp, is an entirely different kind of system than a freshwater cypress swamp or cypress bay, tupelo. There's a number of characteristic trees. We often tend to default to the cypress simply because it's such an iconic tree of the southern wetlands.
It's my favorite tree.
But it is mine. But the bay forest, the evergreen trees, are especially characteristic of these blackwater systems. Other blackwater systems in the southeast that folks may have heard of, the Great Dismal Swamp up on the North Carolina, Southeast Virginia border, and the Carolina Pocosin wetlands just to the south of there have similar geological and ecological characteristics.
And what's a Pocosin? Can you share that with all of us? And for those who may not have heard?
A Pocosin is an Algonquin word. It means a swamp on a hill. Once again, it refers to the perched characteristic. Pocosins usually are headwater systems that will have streams draining from them. And that describes the ones that are called Pocosin, as well as Okefenokee and the Great Dismal.
When you tell people that it's the headwaters for the Suwannee River, that raised a lot of eyebrows a lot of the times. A lot of folks didn't really know that when we take them out in the swamp and tell them we're in the headwaters of Suwannee River. Because a lot more people have heard of Suwannee River than Okefenokee.
Because of the song.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm singing it in my head right now.
And the guy who wrote it never laid eyes on the river.
Oh.
Yeah, true story. He actually wrote PD River, which is in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
But he ran across Suwannee, and he thought that was more mellifluous, so he went with Suwannee.
It sounds better than PD, I have to say.
Yeah.
So
I was surprised how far south in Georgia the Okefenokee was. For some reason, I mean, it's really almost in Florida,
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
And some of it actually does spill into Florida.
Okay.
There's 7,000 acres of the wildlife refuge. The remaining 400,000 acres of it are in Georgia, but there's 7,000 acres of it that are actually across the Florida state line, and there is a lobe of essentially Okefenokee. We call it the Pinhook Swamp. That's an additional 60,000 acres that extends down in and is contained within the Osceola National Forest, which abuts the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge along its south end. Okefenokee is the largest national wildlife refuge east of the Mississippi River. So when you put Okefenokee and Osceola together, along with some state conservation lands that are kind of cornered up into it all, it's a contiguous conservation complex of better than 750,000 acres.
It's all one place to the wildlife, right?
And if you're a black bear, of which we have many, wandering about the landscape, you don't care what we call it. It's all one thing to you.
Yeah.
Right. All right, but we're here to talk about alligators in general, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to focus a little bit on alligator myths.
Yeah, we're going to focus on that as well as their general ecology, because one of the things that I've experienced, and Chip and I have talked about this many times, when I first moved to South Georgia, I had some knowledge about southeastern ecosystems and alligators from taking Sandy Geffner's Everglades course when I was a UB student. But what I'd come to find out was I wanted to read all of these things as fast as I can and learn about the highlight animal that people came to see, the American alligator. And I'm reading stuff and I'm learning what I think is an alligator fact, and then I'll talk with somebody else who knows more than me, such as Chip, about the topic, and I'll find out, no, that's actually incorrect, at least partially or totally. So I'd come to be very careful with acquiring knowledge about American alligators, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Something we touched upon when we did the American crocodile episode.
Yeah.
We mentioned that. So I figured this is a good time to talk about alligator ecology, as well as talking about some of these things that you'll hear people parrot over and over again, including guides in various areas that are actually not the case. And so we're just going to kind of dive into some of those things here.
Got to be skeptical.
So
Right?
Be skeptical. It's what Bill always says.
And especially so when you're dealing with an animal like alligators. And this is a challenge with wildlife biology in general. You observe a behavior and you say, oh, that's what's going on here. Your interpretation may be incorrect. You're not actually necessarily seeing what you think you're seeing, such as mother alligators, when they're ready for the kids to move on. If they're really sticking a little too close to home after they've been there about 3 years, she'll actually go out and grab them in her mouth and throw them and just abuse them. Just literally will run them out of her immediate territory.
That's what happened to me with my mom.
She's not eating them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that will see that and they're like, oh my God, she's eating her babies.
Right.
I've seen that very thing happen. We have a female out on our wildlife drive, and she nests frequently, but she's got one spot, and she'll have a couple of age classes, 1 year and 2 year, and then she'll skip a year or 2 or 3. But when those have all kind of grown out and she's kind of ready to get back into the mating game again, she'll ease them on out of there. Now, a lot of people will tell you that the males will come in and eat them. That actually is grossly overstated, at least as far as American alligators go. Where you see cannibalism with American alligators tends to be during times of severe drought or population stress, where their food supplies are diminished, they're stacked up on each other, and they're tolerant to a point, but it begins to stress them out when they are concentrated. And when that happens, and everybody's feeling hungry, some of the big bulls will begin to predate the subadults, not juveniles. I mean, juveniles are tiny, but they'll begin to predate the 3 and 4 footers. It's kind of almost an eat the adolescent strategy, which may be very attractive to some. I don't know, but you never say never. It does occur, but unlike many of the things that you hear from people and read, they're not out there just noshing on their own young or upon each other as a matter of course.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's definitely one of the topics that I wanted to bring up if it didn't organically, because that's one of the things that I heard as well. Any alligator under 6 feet long is constantly under threat of being cannibalized by a much larger alligator.
That is really grossly, wildly overstated. It's just not the case. But you do learn never say never, and there does seem to be, with other species of crocodilia, there's some evidence that some of the crocodiles are a bit more cannibalistic, but even with those, it also tends to be related to population stress and very, very short food supplies. The voracious alligator, they got those big old mouths, right? People think they're just eating all the time. They're going to eat up all the fish. We can't have all these alligators around here. You remember when I was saying yesterday, if you want to find where the fish are, fish where the alligators are. There's an issue of thermodynamics. Alligators are cold-blooded animals. they're reptiles. They do not require the caloric intake that a mammal or a bird requires, because about 90% of the caloric intake goes into generating a constant high body temperature.
Yeah.
Alligators don't need that 90%.
The analogy I would often use with kids is I would say, you're warm-blooded. When you go to bed at night and you wake up in the morning, you're hungry, but you didn't do anything all night. You slept there, but your body was busy generating heat.
That's right.
Whereas a cold-blooded animal, if it's just sitting still, it's using minimal energy.
That's exactly
just to keep
right.
it alive. So its energy requirements in terms of caloric intake are much less.
That's exactly right. One researcher, this is an old project, found that he could maintained for a year 7 foot-long alligators on the same amount of meat protein it took him to feed his beagle dog.
Wow.
So the idea that they're out there just noshing every animal around them constantly, think about this. Think about predator-prey relationships. When you look out on the African veldt, you've got a very few predators and a whole lot of prey animals because they're all warm-blooded.
Yeah.
You get into a kind of a cold-blooded dominated ecosystem like this one, or Okefenokee, where your apex predators are crocodilians. You've got many, many, many more apex predators relative to the forage base. If they ate as much, you would never be able to have that many alligators.
That's
The landscape would not support that many alligators out there. That's one of the first evidences that paleontologists studying the fossil record proffered as early as like the 1950s and 60s, that the dinosaurs might have been warm-blooded by the Cretaceous, because what they were finding in Cretaceous fossils was a predator-prey ratio. Of course, fossils, that's kind of scattershot anyway, but they were finding predator-prey relationships that they thought resembled, again, the African veldt.
Wow.
Gotcha.
More than what they would expect to find in an Everglades.
Yeah.
And so just so neat when things tie together. One of the real joys of learning things and of understanding science is the constant aha experiences that you have, and I'm happy to say you're never done with them. You'll have them all of your days, and that's hard to convey to people. Why doing what we do is so enjoyable. Why a lot of us have such a sense of mission, about it. There's a passion that really plays in.
Yeah. I do want to stop us for just a sec, because for us it might be a question that seems obvious, but do we want to talk about, just real quick, because I'd point people to our previous episode on crocodiles, the difference between an alligator and a crocodile, because we may have listeners that haven't listened to our previous episode.
Sure.
So real quick.
That's a fun question. Okay.
Uh-oh.
What's the difference between alligators and crocodiles?
I'll let Daniel field this.
All right, I'll answer this. I tell people, I say, if you're not sure what it is, alligator or crocodile, you can go up to it stealthily from behind, jump on its back and pin its head down. And while you're doing that, make sure your legs are around its back legs so it can't move and kick you off.
Yep.
And then pry its jaws open. And if you see salt glands on the tongue, it's a crocodile, not an alligator.
Good advice.
So I think Chip might have a better answer than that, though. We'll see.
That's actually accurate, at least the last part is. And actually,
accurate but not advisable.
Right, accurate but not advisable. The first part of it is actually accurately describing how you do pin one of them down.
Have you done that, Daniel?
So no comment.
Opening one's jaws with your hands is usually not necessary, however, when you jump on one's back. You can just look.
I wanted to give that shout out because we mentioned the process. They didn't discover that crocodiles had salt glands, which are, they figured they had them. How else are they living in these estuarine environments? And they didn't discover that until like the 80s, because when you capture crocodiles, you usually tape the jaws shut. So
they weren't looking.
That's why it took a while. So they weren't looking in the right places. So
if you look at photographs of the inside of a crocodile's mouth, a crocodile's jaws or a gape, versus an alligator or a caiman.
But for the casual listener,
but I
could start with the more basic interpretation. that you hear a lot, which is we'll kind of start with the easier explanations that are a little bit more applicable just down here, like in Everglades National Park, which is the shape of the snout is one. So the snout of an American alligator will be roughly U-shaped. The snout of an American crocodile will be roughly V-shaped. But when you start to zoom out then and you look at other species, that doesn't necessarily hold true. There's a crocodile, Crocodilus palustris, the mugger crocodile. They have more of a U-shaped jaw. And then there's a caiman. I always can't pronounce it. It's Paleosuchus trigonatus. I was close. That is an alligator, a caiman, that tends to have more narrow jaws like our American crocodile. So that is something that, yeah, that'll work for you down here in South Florida, but it's not a universal difference between crocodiles and alligators.
Yeah. What is a universal difference between crocodiles and alligators is the positioning relative to the upper jaw of the fourth tooth back from the front of the jaw. Counting on the lower jaw, counting 4 teeth back, and that's the pinch point where the animals tend to seize prey. They don't grab things right off the end of their snout so much as they tend to side swipe. So they catch things right there along that front edge. And so they have elongated teeth on the top, most species do, that help with that. But there's a long tooth, and on alligatorines and crocodiles, it's longer. On all the alligators, including the caimans, the upper jaw, it flares out, which does tend to give them that broader front of the jaw so that that fourth tooth fits into a pocket in the upper jaw. All of the crocodiles have a notch where that fourth tooth is located, and the fourth tooth slides up on the outside of their jaw, bulldog fashion. It's an up-jutting tooth, and that's pretty visible. You're out on a river looking at it from the side, looking at one basking, you're actually getting more of a side view than an overhead view. Yeah. So it's harder to really see how broad his head is, but you can see that tooth jutting up.
Yeah, and for the listeners out there, they may think it might be a hard distinction to see, but I can back you up that once you start looking for that, it's pretty easy to notice that, oh, that bottom tooth is sticking up, that snaggle tooth, that's a croc and not a gator.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the rest of the teeth too give a little bit more of an interlocking appearance with crocodiles. That's what Greg says in his book.
They do.
Yeah.
Crocodiles look more toothy.
They do look more toothy.
Yeah.
And also their teeth, weirdly, that can vary with the chemistry of the water body that the organisms are living in. Our alligators in Okefenokee, because the system is so acidic, they have discolored teeth relative to these alligators here in the Everglades, which tend to have pearly white teeth. So, environmental factors can play into just some of these things you're seeing.
I remember when I got really used to observing Okefenokee alligators, and then I went to the Everglades for the first time in a while. They were like almost shiny white to me because I was so used to the teeth that the Okefenokee alligators had,
which are more discolored.
Yeah.
Crocodiles. Now, the short answer to what's the difference between alligators and crocodiles? Not much. They're all crocodilians.
Yeah.
Now they've been differentiated from each other, the two families, and there's actually a third one, the Gavilidae, that since the Cretaceous, so they cannot hybridize with each other. Anything about alligators and crocodiles having hybridized with each other, and I remember somebody brought me a National Enquirer article one time that talked about this having happened. It has never happened.
Did they cite their sources?
Yeah. Some of the crocodiles can hybridize with each other.
Oh yeah.
And do. But the alligators and crocodiles are far too genetically differentiated for that really to be an issue. And there have been some structural adaptations since they diverge. One notable one is the salt excreting organs on the tongue, which who knows their ancestral form may or may not have had them, but only the crocodiles have them today. I do note, while much is said about these crocodiles in the Glades country being restricted or preferring saltier and brackish water, that's where they're found. That's where you find the American crocodile all through the Americas, but it absolutely can live in fresh water too, and will. They will move up into river systems well inland in Central America, Northern South America, other places where they're found. And of the other species of crocodiles in the world, there's really only two that live in brackish environments a lot, but every single species of crocodile has salt excreting glands on its tongue. And
the gators don't.
And alligators do not. So these alligators out here, they've got behavioral adaptations to living in a saltier environment, but there are limits. They can dehydrate just like we can. Yeah. They have to find fresh water. That's how we happen to have this one in this old cistern right here
let's
on
talk
this
about
site.
this.
You know.
When we got here to the site last night, folks, Daniel made a great discovery. So did you say we're at Watson's place?
So we're at Watson's place. It's down the Chatham River, which kind of branches off the main route of the Everglades Wilderness Waterway. And we noted the cistern when we pulled up. And I actually walked kind of near the cistern, actually to relieve myself. And I look over.
Not into the cistern.
Not into the cistern. And much to my surprise, I look over. And I mean, what is the cistern? Maybe like 8 feet by 10 feet or something.
Yeah, so it's like
like that.
It's like an 8 foot by 10 foot. It almost looks like an empty, tiny swimming pool.
Yes.
And it was to collect fresh water.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we pull up there, and much to my surprise, there's like a 8.5 foot alligator just hanging out in the cistern.
Yeah, it's a grown one. It's not even it's not even a little one. It's a big alligator, and it's still there. It was there, stayed there all night. It got cool last night.
So there are some other folks that are staying at the site as well, and one mentioned that he was going to check out the Field Guides podcast. So if you're listening to this, it was great to meet you.
Yeah.
But he had told me that throughout the night when they'd hear some splashing or something, they're like, oh, is that alligator crawling out?
Yeah.
What's going on? So it certainly added to the excitement of this place.
And this cistern is maybe 15, 20 feet from the waterway we were paddling on, but it's different water, right?
Yep,
yeah, so for the listeners, they may not realize what we're paddling through is like brackish water, right?
It is.
Yes.
Full on salt water, or is this brackish?
It's brackish.
Yeah.
It's still brackish.
Yeah.
But and we've seen quite a few alligators, and pretty good sized ones, and you will find alligators in coastal marshes, the brackish coastal marshes, throughout their range in the southeast. They will actually come onto dry land after a rainstorm and drink from puddles, which is really something interesting to see. It was long suspected, but has now been verified by researchers. I know one guy on the Guana Preserve, he determined that they do, in fact, sip the surface water. After a rainstorm, fresh water from rain will float on top of the saltier water.
It's less dense.
Because it's less dense before it intermingles with it, and because they pretty much live right at the water surface, they can just sip that floating fresh water right off the top.
That's thought to be the case of the time for breeding with American crocodiles in South Florida, because the smaller crocodilians are a little bit more stressed by salt because of their body mass to surface area ratio. And so if you're a baby crocodile, you want to hatch out during the wet season down here. Down here in extreme South Florida, we have a wet and dry season. And if you're a young hatchling crocodile, you hatch during the wet season, you may be a little bit more susceptible to salt stress. You have rain potentially every day during the wet season where you can actually hydrate yourself by that freshwater lens at the top.
Yeah, that's funny. It's just making me think about how in our area, the young come at the end of the spring when they have the most time to grow and build up endurance to be ready for the winter, whereas down here it's still based around the seasons. Like, when are the young born? They're born during the wet season when they can find a less extreme time of year to be growing up in. Yeah. But you mentioned something before we turned on the mic. I think it's a good point to talk about it. We've mentioned on the podcast before that one of the great things about Everglades National Park is it is one place in the world where we can find alligators and crocodiles, so people want to know the difference because they could see either one here. Yeah. And I know I've said many times before that it's the only place in the world. Just before this trip, when I was talking to some of my students about coming down here, and they were talking about they saw a crocodile in Everglades when they were here. I'm like, well, did you see an alligator? Because it's the only place in the world where you can see both of them. But then I heard Chip telling Daniel, no, it's not. So,
well, this is something that we touched upon in the American Crocodile episode. You know, it's like, well, it's one of those things where what you exactly mean is really important.
Yep.
And before Chip jumps out of his pants, I'll let him continue. I know.
he's grabbing the microphone out of me.
But
hold my beer.
It is truly that depends on how you define an alligator.
Yeah.
Because if we're strictly talking about the American alligator, well, there's only 2 true genus alligators in the world. The American alligator and the Chinese alligator. There's no crocodiles in China, not now. And there's no other alligators anywhere else but the United States. The only place in the United States that we have crocodiles is at the southern tip of Florida, which is the northern limit of the American crocodiles range, which is the same species as found throughout the Caribbean and the coast of both Atlantic and Pacific, of Central America and northern South America. So it's a very widespread species. But the caimans, really, they're members of the alligator family. They're classified as alligators, or alligatorids or alligatorines. They're kissing cousins to alligators, and they are often called alligators just informally in that part of the world, and others actually they call them yacaré generally down there. But you can find caimans and crocodiles that are sympatric in a number of locations through Central and Northern South America. Although even there, they do somewhat habitat separate, with the caimans living in the fresher and the American crocodiles living in the saltier environments. But
Daniel, did we talk about this? Like that what Chip's talking about in the last episode?
We talked a bit about the caiman and crocodiles being sympatric in other parts, and that they're alligators.
And what does sympatric mean,
We've talked
guys?
about that. They existing within the same range.
All right,
Yeah,
so-
living in the same areas.
So we have to just alter what we say, and the only place in North America you can find alligators and crocodiles is in southern Florida.
or the only place that you can find true alligators.
Okay.
And although caimans aren't false alligators.
Right.
So it's one of those things where you got to get really specific.
It's how
you know.
you define
Right.
alligator.
But one of the reasons why we even, what Chip was telling me why he even brought that up is because it is absolutely a selling point. It is a way to promote the Everglades, to promote
Sure.
South Florida. This is the only, it's one of those things to promote how amazing this place is. And that was, so it's a little bit hyperbolized as if it needs any other reason for people to come down here. But
And we tend to do that. We tend to do that in all things.
Yeah.
Is you'll go for the superlative or the exceptional. Every place has got to have something where it's the only, what makes it unique.
Sure.
And unique is a tricky word. It means one of a kind. It does not mean a really exceptional example of its kind. And you hear ecosystems described as unique when in fact there's other ecosystems very similar to them that are less well known. The Everglades system here is as close to being unique as almost anything that we've got, wetland wise anyway, in North America.
that doesn't sound quite as good, though.
But it actually shares a great deal in common with an area in Mexico called the Usumacinta Delta, which is not nearly as well known, but it will have many of the same species. Of course, down there it's going to be caimans and crocodiles.
Do they say this is the only place you can find caimans and crocodiles existing? I know it's not.
It's not nearly as well publicized.
Let's go next. Let's go next year.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh no, we're going to the Okefenokee next year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But the tendency towards superlatives can create a false narrative. And that's something that I think interpretive naturalists need to be careful. It's easy to kind of lapse into that as you're learning new stuff, but it's like that placard at the Oasis. Now, this is the National Park Service. Sure, I understand it, but right there it says that alligators may grow to be 15 feet long and 1,000 pounds. And it's like, that is absolutely the maximum size that some of the very largest males achieve. But you are talking about, there are Homo sapiens that exceed 7 feet
Right.
in height.
How many do you know?
But you wouldn't say
how many,
humans may grow to 7 feet tall.
But you would not say, if you were being asked to describe
by an alien.
Americans, yeah. If you were being asked to describe the human species, would you say can grow to 7.5 feet tall and 450 pounds? Just pick them. No, you wouldn't. It's like those are kind of the outsized outliers.
Right.
Yeah.
If we're going to interpret, let's interpret. Let's bring some nuance to bear.
And I think
enough.
I think your indignation came more from, we were at a national park site,
right?
Not a side of the road alligator place.
That's exactly
you expected a little more out of the national park service.
I love the national park and all of y'all. You're doing the work of the angels, but avoid that pitfall. I see it a lot.
Well, you're giving people a false impression.
You're creating a false narrative.
But that goes to what we said earlier. There are so many of these false narratives with alligators and with crocodilians, and I know you were about to say something, Bill, but I think this would be a good segue into talking about what some say is the biggest alligator ever recorded. In quotations.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of the things we found again and again in recording the podcast, because I used to be an environmental educator, and there were so many times where I realized I didn't question something, and I was letting a good story get in the way of the truth.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, ooh, that's a great fact, and you want to share that with the group because it's something fascinating, but you're not giving them the whole story. So, and I think animals like crocodiles and alligators just breed those kind of situations. It's just so easy, especially animals that people could see and there was fear involved with them.
Absolutely.
So it just it's like a story generator.
Yes.
That situation.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Before people really studied them and understood them, and a lot of these stories still persist. So even though research has given us a much clearer view of what's actually going on. So that's why we're here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So what about the biggest one?
Yeah. So for the longest time, when you search up what is the world record biggest American alligator, a lot of searches will come up with this number that's like 19 something feet long in Louisiana.
19 feet 2.
19 feet 2? Thank you. Yeah. That's why Chip's here. He's here to correct me.
No, I've just seen that figure all my life, over and over and over.
Like, I'll never forget, my favorite restaurant, they're not sponsoring this episode, but my favorite restaurant, the Crab Shack at Tybee Island, they have a life-size replica of that 19-foot alligator on the side, and it's really cool, and it has the signage and the words saying that the biggest alligator 19 feet 2 inches, and that is just so much larger than the officially recorded biggest specimen found. So I just think it has to be an error, and the fact that the unit of measurement was, I believe, a shotgun. So
the animal was so large they could not move it. It was predating cattle on the E.A. McElhenney property, the Tabasco sauce family. E.A. McElhenney wrote the alligator's life history, the first text on the American alligator written for the literate lay audience. And it's reprinted now, the joys of print on demand publishing, but it's a well-written piece from a guy who spent a lot of years out there observing the animals firsthand, but he got some things wrong. And the fact that he was not a professional scientist brought criticism, but he is actually the one who killed it, and it was on his property. They were losing cattle to a big alligator, and when they went out there to track it down, they found this enormous alligator, which they assumed was the culprit. They shot him. He was too large to move, but he was in poor condition. And old alligators will do that. This idea that alligators don't experience senescence, that crocodilians don't experience senescence, just like Galapagos tortoises don't. Yeah, they do.
They don't kind of wind down as they die.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
They have a pretty good long run of it for a wild animal. Of course, you have to consider it takes them the better part of a decade to grow large enough to reach reproductive maturity.
Do we know how long their lifespan is?
It generally, male alligators will live 50 to 60 years, and female alligators will live about a decade less. That's in an environment where they're not experiencing heightened mortality from Homo sapiens. You go to a place like Louisiana, there's a lot of alligators in Louisiana. There's a lot of big alligators in Louisiana, and there's relatively few in Louisiana that get to live more than about 35, 40 years before somebody takes them out. Yeah. But they will grow for about 35 years of their life. But that goes back to, this idea that the really big ones are really old ones because they've lived long enough to reach this big size. That alligator's really big because he's got the genetics to be a big alligator, and he had the forage base while he was growing up to realize his genetic potential. And if he is an outsized 13, 14 foot alligator, you've just got a Shaquille O'Neal alligator. I mean, it's just that simple. Most adult male alligators will top out somewhere between 9 and 10 feet long, with a fair number of them that might make it up to around 11. There's relatively few of them that exceed about 11 feet long.
So and I want to highlight this then. There is a point where they stop growing.
There is.
Because that's something where I have heard countless times that crocodilians, just as long as they have the food supply, yep, and nobody kills them or no other animal kills them, they will just continue to grow.
And there are many well-educated, knowledgeable people out there that absolutely take that as an article of faith because that's what they were taught. And it's a commitment to track a single alligator from hatching to full adulthood, but at this point we now have facilities that have kept alligators in optimum conditions, or at least their growth rates in captivity are consistent with what's observed in the wild, so they're doing something right. And you see the same thing with them. The animals will get up to about 35 years old, and then there's just very little growth beyond that point, if any. But that's one of those things. Michael, he was convinced they grew throughout their life.
Who was convinced?
Michael Henney, the guy who wrote the Alligator Life History.
Oh, gotcha.
That's one of the things that he actually got wrong. He may be responsible for some of that, but that idea was always around. It's always been around with reptile keepers.
So I hate to ask this question, but yeah, I'm sure some of the audience is wondering. So what is the official biggest alligator on record?
That 19 feet 2 inch figure is out there. If you look at the state of Florida's alligator harvest, if you look at the state of Louisiana's alligator harvest, these states, alligators numbers were brought back to a point. The largest animals in both states, I think, that have been logged thus far fall just a little shy of 15 feet long.
Okay.
And I mean, those are exceptional alligators.
Those are the outliers.
The biggest alligator I ever knew in Okefenokee Swamp, I saw for the first time when I was 15 years old, and he died in the spring of my 47th year. Wow. And I could not tell that animal had grown a bit. He actually diminished in girth as he got older. He was thicker when I was in college than he was by the time I was working in Okefenokee full time. And when he died, as it happened, he was fading. You can tell when you've got an old alligator that's fading out. He'll a lot of times he'll crawl up on the bank, and he just won't slide back in the water even when it gets cold.
He'll start watching Fox News.
Yeah. I mean, he's on his way out. His best days are behind him, definitely. But and sometimes the black vultures will see them laying out there, and they'll start in on them before the things have quite expired. There's some pretty grim things you see out there in nature sometimes. I had a rope. That's all I had. I didn't have a tape measure, but I was opening the Craven's Hammock Canoe Trail with a couple of friends of mine, and we went by him, and the vultures were beginning to gather around him, and we got out and we looked at him and picked up the tip of his tail and just dropped it. I thought he was dead.
Don't try this at home.
Don't do this at home, yeah. But I picked up the tip of his tail just a few inches and dropped it, and when I did, there was just a little flutter kind of moved through his body. But it was like, man, my friend Robert Jones, may he rest in peace, said, yeah, he's still here. The pilot light's still on, but that's about all at this point. And so we went on up and we worked for a couple of days on this canoe trail getting it opened up, and when we came back down, the vultures were all over him. And so he was gone by that point. So we stretched him out on the bank, and we took 1/4-inch cord and we put it on his nose, and we pulled it right down the middle of his back to the tip of his tail, and we cut it off right there at the tip of his tail.
19.3 inches.
14 feet 7 inches long.
Wow.
That was the biggest alligator I ever knew in the swamp. The biggest one I know in Okefenokee right now is about 13.5 feet. Wow. There's only a handful that are over 11. I mean, just a handful.
All right, you heard it here, folks.
But I know many people that have seen 15-footers.
It's amazing. It is amazing how many 10-foot alligators become 15-foot.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how they see them swimming when it's just their head showing.
Right.
And they're like, oh, that was not very big. You let that same alligator crawl out on a log, and it's like, oh, wow, that's a big one. It's like the difference between seeing just the animal's head, maybe a little bit of his neck and back, versus seeing the entire alligator stretched out. It just throws people completely off, you know.
Even the one here right in the cistern. You just saw, you know, last night when I just saw its eyes to its nose above the water, I'm like, oh, it's not that big. But then when you see the whole body, you're like, oh, no, that is a good size. It's bigger than me.
The old alligator hunters, rule of thumb for estimating how long one is when you can just see his head. This is not a hard and fast rule, because alligators, like everything else, have a little bit of individual variation going on. Some are a little longer headed in proportion to the rest of their body. That also can be an indication of how well fed that alligator was, or other environmental factors in its growing up. And just like us, just differences in genetics. But in general, the alligator hunter's trick is from the front of his eyes to where the nose bulb comes up. Not to the end of the nose, but just that run of his snout between his eyes and his nose in inches will roughly equate to the length of the alligator in feet.
Oh, okay.
And particularly for medium-sized alligators, that's pretty accurate.
When we've captured alligators with the University of Georgia team with Mark Hogue, we've taken those measurements, and we found that to be pretty consistent.
It is.
Did you measure that? Or did you talk about that before? That sounds familiar to me for some reason.
I may have. With you, I definitely have.
Yeah. Some things aren't actually missed. Some things actually do bear out.
True, right.
But I've always told folks, I've certainly told Daniel here, he's heard me say it a lot, about half of what you think you know about alligators may be inaccurate. And there's about half of it's just plumb wrong. Right. When I was first a young lad reading up on everything that I could lay my hands on about alligators and crocodiles, which was a whole lot less than's out there now. That I find that gratifying. But I would constantly run across these references to them sweeping prey into the water with their tail.
I've seen it happen.
I mean, that myth, which is not entirely extinct, appears to almost be so now, but it was very prevalent in the 60s and 70s, this business of them bludgeoning animals, you know, with their tail.
That's just, it's so comical to imagine like them lining up their tail like, all right, here I'm gonna go.
Yeah, like a golfer.
But you know where it comes from, or where we think it comes from? A misinterpretation that Herodotus made.
Oh God.
Herodotus wrote the first natural history.
He did.
And Herodotus noted that the Egyptians said there were two kinds of crocodiles, which we did not actually verify until just a few years ago, genetically. That there is actually a second large species of crocodile in Africa that is nearly identical to the long identified Nile crocodile, but somewhat less prone to eat human beings. and we always thought that it was just forage based, that these lake crocodiles over here were just more fish eaters, and these water hole hunters just by necessity had to ambush large mammals more. It turns out no, they're different species of crocodiles. Wow. And you're more likely to get eaten by the one that just habitually preys on large mammals. Fortunately, most crocodilians eat fish. If they have a choice, their favorite food of all is a fish.
So we actually the only thing I know about Herodotus and his natural history
Yep.
book, because we talked about this on the podcast once before. I don't know if, Daniel, you were on it, but he theorized that bear cubs were born as blobs of flesh, and the mother licked them into bear shape.
Yes.
So,
Yes. I mean, it's pretty fanciful
But
stuff,
you can imagine, you know, a mother maybe cleaning one of her cubs that's just rolled up, and you can kind of see where these misinterpretations come from. You know?
Good point.
So
The Nile monitor lizards, and iguanids absolutely do use their tail for defense. You ever tried to pick one of them up?
I've talked to people who have grabbed iguanas in Florida.
Absolutely, man, they'll light you up.
Yeah.
They will whip that tail around. You know, crocodilians don't do it.
Yeah.
But Herodotus appears to have conflated the Nile crocodile and the Nile monitor, both big saurians found around river systems in Africa, and there you go. And it only took 2,000 years to straighten it out.
we give Herodotus 1 star.
Well, being on that point of myths, we are running up just under an hour. We actually need to get back to our canoe somewhat soon to head to our next location, which is Pavilion Key. Bill, I know you had a couple more myths rolling around in the back of your head you wanted to share. So,
well, the one that I've been kind of holding on to that I definitely want to share is, I'm sure a lot of listeners are wondering this too, but in the lead up to this trip, you know, we're here, folks, in the days between Christmas and New Year's, 2025. It's actually New Year's Day or New Year's Eve today.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I forgot which day it was.
Happy New Year. But you know, leading up to this, talking to coworkers, talking to my family at our holiday parties about what we were going to be doing, nearly every person expressed genuine concern. Like, aren't you worried about getting eaten by an alligator?
Yeah.
Like genuine concern. So we're here paddling in the Everglades. Are we concerned?
I'm not.
I'm not concerned. But that begs the question: are we being foolish?
No.
And tell us why.
Any large predator needs to be respected. And it is, in fact, a sad truth that American alligators have attacked and killed people. Now, there are far more non-fatal incidents than fatal incidents, but almost all of the incidents involving alligators and people involve animals that have been habituated to human presence. Very often, animals that have been fed. There are certain behaviors that you watch for if you're responsible for the public visiting a place that has alligators. They begin to show aberrant behaviors, demonstrate aberrant behaviors, such as approaching people. No wild alligator comes swimming over to investigate you. You notice that these alligators that we've encountered, they swing, they keep a wide berth between us and them. Alligators consider us to be a threat. Honestly, they don't ever get over the fact that for the early years of their life, they are predated. They are preyed upon by every animal out here that will eat a fish or a frog. And so they have a healthy respect for us. We look bigger than we actually are when we stand upright and loom over them. And we're just simply not an animal that they look at and say, there's food.
Right.
They like to stick to stuff that they can grab, crunch, and gulp down. But never say never.
Right. Yeah. It's not a zero chance.
But it's kind of like, I always tell people, okay, American alligators are not Nile crocodiles. Black bear are not grizzly. However, black bear have killed and predated human beings too. But we don't think of black bear the same way we think of grizzly. Right. When you go into grizzly country,
you go with bear spray.
You go with bear spray. And I'll tell you this, if you're in a mangrove area like this in northern Australia, that's not a really good place to be paddling.
I'm not paddling there.
You need to be in a bigger boat in the mangrove swamps of northern Australia, because saltwater crocodiles do look at us as a potential prey animal. Sure. And you really are taking your life in your hands in northern Australia. In the United States, no. Yeah. You want to exercise some caution. And every time we do have an incident, and we had one not long ago at a state park in central Florida, And I've gotten up on top of alligators before in shallow water too, and had them bolt out from under me and kind of rock the boat, but it didn't flip the boat and we didn't fall on top of it. And that's apparently what happened with this couple. And the alligator grabbed the woman and it killed her.
And I just wanted to touch upon that, because when I first read the headlines that a woman in a kayak was killed by an alligator,
Yep.
I was like, we need to know the details. I mean, that headline can inspire so much fear. People immediately start thinking she was paddling and this alligator exploded out of the water and plucked her from her kayak. And then I started seeing all of these videos on Instagram filming a very large alligator along the bank of some little island or something in a river, and that alligator seeing them and out of fear, out of wanting to get away from them, sliding into the water, and that video being posted and proclaimed as the last video that woman in the kayak took before that alligator killed her. I'll comment to be like, no, this video came from this alligator is exhibiting behavior to flee, not to attack the person in the kayak. And all these people are going, nope, this is what happened, this alligator went in and killed her. So it's just, these things just get perpetuated, and that was just a freak tragic accident.
And we live in a 24/7 news cycle, where if an incident occurs, it is global news overnight.
Right.
That didn't used to be the case. Now, in fact, we had very few actual documented cases. Some sources would tell you none. That's not entirely true when you really dig into it. But until I think 1972, we did not actually have a recorded or verified to everybody's satisfaction case of an American alligator killing anyone until one killed a 16-year-old girl at Oscar Scherer State Park over by Sarasota, Florida, in the early 70s. I think it was 72. It may have been 73 or 74, but I was still in junior high when it happened, and it was a big deal, when that got out. But how many million people swim in Florida's rivers and lakes every single summer, all summer long? And Florida has got better than 1 million alligators, say.
That's what something I came across in my reading is that it's not a zero chance of something happening.
That's
but
right.
when you factor in the amount of daily exposure and the number of people that are exposed to alligators, and the amount of times that incidents actually happen, the chances are very, very low. So you want to be respectful.
Always.
But keep the realities of the risk in mind.
Funny thing about risk, people consider some things much more risky than they actually are, like alligator. In fact, in risk management, an alligator, that's an actual term in risk management, I was told, that an alligator in risk management is something that is of low frequency but very high danger, very high risk. And the guy who told me that, I said, because he had come with a documentary group and we were doing a program in Okefenokee, and he was all paranoid about the fact there were alligators here. And I told him that's exactly backwards. That in fact their frequency, where you find alligators, there often are a lot of them in that particular area. The actual danger that they pose, each individual alligator poses, is actually pretty low.
Right.
But interpreting alligators in a way that presents them as understandable animals and not some kind of scary monster is the biggest challenge.
That's why we're doing this, right?
And sensationalist videos, and everybody's got a camera nowadays.
Yep.
The internet is absolutely full of alligator videos, and oh gosh, it is not helping the situation. I think we're going backwards in a lot of ways.
Well, there was also too, I remember for a long time, there was a long stretch of time without a fatal alligator attack.
Yep.
And then right around the time I moved to South Georgia, there was like 3 in a year or something along
that's right.
And I think that just totally skyrocketed the concern and the fear and the hype and all of that.
It's exactly that.
But when we talked about the numbers of this crocodilian database, and we were talking about fatalities since like the 80s, or I think it was since the 80s. If I can recall correctly, for alligators, it was in like the teens. We talked about American crocodiles. It was 0 in the state of Florida, but it was like 26 worldwide, mostly in like Costa Rica and other places.
Right.
But then we brought up the saltwater crocodile and the Nile crocodile, which were both around 900 individuals. And the Nile crocodile, you know that a lot of them are undocumented, considering how remote some of the places are where they do prey on people. So that those numbers just kind of put that into perspective.
And when you compare that with the exposure, especially for alligators, we could say it's not a zero chance, but it's close to zero.
Yes.
Right?
And there are certain scenarios that can start to have that percentage tick up.
Right.
If it's fed, if it's larger, being habituated to people, nighttime, those sorts of things. So.
And folks, we can all say, firsthand that, the alligators that we see, they're just such beautiful animals, and just the experience of getting to see them up close is something I wouldn't want to trade.
We were all so excited to see our first alligator on the trip.
Yeah.
Just crossing, we saw it from a distance. We were thinking, is it a crocodile? Is it an alligator? And the way when it just swam in front of us, we all just stopped paddling and just watched it go by in awe every time.
We are in a part of the Everglades where you absolutely can encounter the two animals in the same area.
Yeah. We better see a crocodile.
That's the goal. We'll let you know in the episode notes if we find one.
Yeah. All right. Is this a good spot to
I think, because we were kind of on a morbid turn and then it went up, so I think now would be a good point to stop.
There is one thing I want Chip to address quickly.
Okay.
One of the myths I came across is that you can't run away from an alligator, that they can run 30 to 35 miles an hour.
Okay, yeah, boy, I'm glad, because that one's been repeated fairly recently.
You got to run zigzag, right?
Do you know where that comes from?
No.
The President of the United States?
Recently, yes. But somebody told him that because he didn't come up with that on his own. And I'm quite confident he did not read Raymond Dittmer's Reptiles of the World. In 1970, when my father was in Vietnam, I read Raymond Dittmer's Reptiles of the World all the way through. It was one of the very few texts that was out there, that was available for a enthusiastic young naturalist like myself. And he says, people talk about how fast they can run. It's said that they can run as fast as a horse. A racehorse can run about 35 miles an hour. So boom, right there it is. There's where that 35 mile an hour figure. And then he says, but that's in a very short distance in a straight bolt. And he's joking. If you read it in context, even as a fifth grader reading it, I got that he was joking, which I thought was a little odd because, naturalists don't usually joke about things, but he was joking. And he says, perhaps it would be wise to run zigzag. And it's like, it's a joke. And I took it as a joke, but it's easy to see why somebody could read that and think, oh wow, okay, this is from the man himself, and so this is the best advice. You run zigzag. Stop and think about it just for a second. If something can already run faster than you, what are you gaining by cutting back and forth across its path? Basic geometry tells you that is not going to work. If you ever have one rush at you, the best thing to do is run straight back away from it, because what you'll usually find is it's not really running to try to catch you. They don't pursue things any great distance over land if they can't catch a large animal right at the water's edge. But you get a female like trying to run you away from her nest, she'll rush you, but she'll stop. But when you get an alligator rushing at you, you're not going to usually stand there.
I'm not calling its bluff.
No.
Now, if you do, if you got the stones to call its bluff, if you stand there, she will run right up to your feet, and she will stop right there. Usually, she'll do this thing where she thrashes her whole body back and forth in front of you, And if you're like, all right, and you run, she'll chase you some more. But she'll actually stop right there.
I wish the audience could get the visual that we just had of Chip thrashing like an enraged female alligator.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, they can spin. I've come up on female alligators before, and I'm looking at their tail, and all of a sudden, bam, there's their head. They can reverse ends with unbelievable speed. And they are explosive. They can go from 0 to full locomotion. And to answer the question, 16 miles an hour is the top running speed of a smaller alligator.
Over a short distance.
Over a very short distance.
Okay.
Johnston's crocodiles are the fastest. They can run about 20. They gallop. Young Johnson's crocodiles actually will gallop, but they really got to be motivated.
All right. All right, so do you want to check out our target species in the cistern?
Yeah, let's see. And then do a quick wrap up.
Yep. All right, let's go. So we're heading out of the woods that line our campsite, heading out towards the water. Rich and John have done all the work of cleaning up our campsite.
Oh, look at that.
And I don't want to scare it away, but it's floating right in
He's
the
up
water.
more.
So,
Gonna blow a little now.
Yeah.
So it's
I wonder if
murky
the mic-
water in there. How deep do you think that is?
Well, want me to find out? Throw me some money, I might. 5 feet maybe, max? 3 feet?
Floating right on the
He can
surface.
submerge, or she.
Chip sticking a stick in the water to test the depth.
I can't reach the bottom with that. That's a couple of feet.
Down he goes.
So now it's just submerged. All right, well, Chip, we cannot thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with the audience, with us, for taking the time to do this. It's been great.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. And Daniel, thank you for
Great
setting this up.
being with you.
Oh, it was great to do this. I missed doing the podcast with you guys. It was great to be back and great to finally put together something that I wanted to do for years now.
It's good to have you back.
Good to be here.
All right, folks, I will do a wrap-up after the trip. Maybe I'll make Steve do the wrap-up.
That'd be great.
All right. And hopefully we won't get eaten by any alligators on the rest of the trip.
You'll certainly find out.
All right, see you next time.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. I have Violet here. We are back in Western New York.
Ahoy.
And it's about a month after I've gotten back from the trip, and I wanted to do this wrap-up with Violet outside, but it is 11 degrees outside, and Violet said she wanted to do it inside instead.
Yeah,
Right?
not gonna happen.
So we don't have the sounds of nature around us, but we're going to do something a little different this episode for our wrap-up. Normally, I record a special version of the podcast for our patrons where I share the episode notes on mic. Now, we want to encourage everyone to become a patron, so for this special episode, we are going to include me reading the episode notes so everyone can get a sense of what it's like to be a patron of the Field Guides.
Hooray!
Also, folks, I did want to mention that normally when we have a guest on the show, like Chip, we ask them if they would like an honorarium or if they would like us to make a donation to a charity of their choosing, a nonprofit, environmental organization is usually what it happens to be. And Chip, he very graciously wanted us to make a donation on behalf of our patrons to Earth Spirit Educational Services. So if you've been a longtime listener, you've heard us mention Sandy Geffner many times as a person formative in Steve's life and in my life. And he runs Earth Spirit. We posted about them a few times on social media. Daniel also worked for Earth Spirit for a while. They do great work in environmental education here in Western New York, and we are happy that Chip chose them as the organization that would receive support from our podcast. So thank you, Chip, and thank you for Earth Spirit for everything that you do. All right, so on with the wrap-up. First and foremost, we'd like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you to our new patrons, Robert S., Renz, Sean M., and Abby. We also would like to give a special shout-out each month to our top patrons. So stick around to the end of this episode to hear Violet here share that list. And remember, if you'd like to be part of the Field Guides and read our patron list in a future episode, email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron of our show at patreon.com. Because of support from our listeners, we've been able to keep the show free and make cooler episodes like this very one. Or you can make a one-time donation through PayPal on our website. A big thank you to Thomas W. and Tra18232, both of whom made extremely generous donations in December.
Remember, you can also help out by sharing this podcast with friends and family and by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps spread the word and allows us to reach a wider audience. We'd like to thank our newest iTunes reviewer, Nick with no C.
Come enjoy our sporadic posts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Instagram. And you can always email us ideas for episode topics, criticisms, or your stories of personal encounters with alligators in unexpected places to thefieldguides@gmail.com.
And parents, remember to get those kids outside. Let them get muddy. Let them get dirty and snowy. Let them flip over rocks and logs. And if you don't have kids, make sure to make some time to get yourself outside. And now I'm going to share the episode notes for this particular episode. First, I want to talk about alligators, metabolism, and the dog comparison. Because during the episode, Chip mentioned a study suggesting that several alligators could be maintained on roughly the same caloric intake as a single dog. Now, I looked this up following the episode when I got back home, and I wasn't able to locate a specific study that makes that specific numerical comparison. However, the underlying idea that Chip was expressing is strongly supported by research on alligator physiology. American alligators have extremely low metabolic rates compared to warm-blooded mammals because they're ectothermic and they don't spend energy maintaining body temperature. We talked about that during the episode. Classic physiological work shows that adult alligators can have daily energy expenditures that are only a small fraction of those of similarly sized mammals, making informal comparisons like the one Chip did directionally accurate, even if the exact ratio is anecdotal rather than experimental. And we did link to a study that covers this in our episode notes. We also want to talk about freshwater sipping and the study behind that observation. The behavior Chip describes is documented in a study by 2 researchers which examined how coastal alligators use estuarine habits, so those areas where saltwater and freshwater mix. The authors note that after heavy rainfall, a thin layer of freshwater can temporarily sit on top of saltier water, and alligators will take advantage of this by drinking from the surface. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
This helps them manage hydration and salt balance in brackish environments, despite lacking the salt-excreting glands found in crocodiles. Also, we want to talk about alligator growth versus age. Chip addressed this myth that alligators continue to grow throughout their life. Echoing what he reported, research on American alligators shows that although hatchlings and juveniles grow rapidly, their rate of growth slows substantially as they get older, and studies indicate that they reach near maximum body size well before the end of their lives. Long-term data suggest many alligators stop adding significant length by roughly 25 to 35 years of age. And more recent work has revised this classic idea of indefinite growth toward a pattern of determinate growth with a growth plateau in adulthood. And now let's talk about human harvest of alligators in Louisiana, because Chip did mention that Louisiana has the highest harvest. I wanted to confirm this, so I looked it up, and the data does show Louisiana supports the largest wild harvest program for the American alligator in the U.S., with more than 2,000 licensed hunters routinely harvesting an estimated 30 to 35,000 wild alligators annually under a regulated tagging system. No. Wild apparently does not like that. In contrast, other states such as Florida have regulated harvest programs with substantially lower annual take. And again, all these items, folks, we're going to link to further documents, works cited in the episode notes. So check those out if you want more information. And lastly, we're going to talk about fatal alligator attacks. Chip discussed the history of these conflicts, highlighting the 1973 Sharon Holmes incident as the first fully confirmed, quote-unquote, fatal attack in modern records. Now, while the Holmes incident is often cited as the definitive first case, when I looked into it, there was an earlier death that some consider to be the first modern fatality. But when you do look at historical records, they show why Chip's reference to the Holmes case as being the first fully confirmed case, that's accurate. So Sharon Holmes in 1973, this is what Chip talked about. She was killed while swimming at Oscar Scherer State Park. It's amazing that Chip had the name of that state park in his head. This is widely cited as the first fully confirmed fatality because of the absolute nature of the evidence. The attack was witnessed by bystanders, and a subsequent necropsy of the 11-foot, 3-inch alligator found conclusive physical remains. This event marked a turning point in how state agencies, like the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, tracks and verifies alligator-related deaths. Now, the earlier case that I mentioned was Alan Rice in 1957, so about 16 years earlier. Now, while most official Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission reports fatal attacks beginning in 1973 with Sharon Holmes, this 1957 death of a 9-year-old, Alan Rice, is often mentioned as an earlier case, but it's technically categorized as presumed because he went missing while fishing, and though his body was recovered with injuries consistent with an alligator attack, and a large gator was seen nearby, there were no direct witnesses to the strike. So a little nuance there. Those are all the episode notes for this episode, and now it is time for Violet to read our patron list.
All right, here we go. Eric, Alyssa, Adam, Colin G, Mary B, Renz, Abby, Dr. Judy, Kimberly B, Peter R, Callie, the Hebranks, Rich K, Rachel L, the Drunk Phytologist, Orange Julianne, DJ, Diane, We named the dog Indy. Hot Dog Cold Weather, Dwayne H., Jennifer D., Jonathan A., Deborah B., Sam B., Jeremy M., Lori B., Licky Weeks, Virginia A., Catherine W., Holly M., Michaela, Val, Andy W., John R., Evan, Picasso 3, Mark T., Cecilia, Julie B., Dennis, Chris N., Sung, Jeff S., Jonathan K., Matt E., Plants in My Pants, Ryan R., Sophie S., Connor H., Measure and Principal, Fragaria Pepaloinoidea, Outside Chronicles, Quixote, Max D., Melissa Marie in Dusty, Arizona, Kelly S., Sarah S., Helen A., Judy F., Ben C., Jane H., Doodle Dude 82, Gail and Mac, Kazis, Esther C., John W., Mark V., Bethany H., and Rob M.
All right. Patrons, once again, thanks so much. Your support makes a special episode like this one possible. And as we always say, we cannot thank you enough for your support, and we will continue to try to live up to it. And everyone, we will see you next time.
Time for lunch. Goodbye.
I'm recording.
Jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
What's that? Nice. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.